There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. That's the claim made in this book, The Myth of Sisyphus, by French philosopher and writer Albert Camus, and it's the book that we'll be diving into in this video. Before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy my content. It helps a ton. But enough of that. Let's look at this really interesting and exciting piece of work. Albert Camus was this wonderful French Algerian writer. He's one of my favorite writers. He's written pieces like The Plague, The Fall, The Stranger, The Myth of Sisyphus, A Happy Death, and the list goes on. He's a very well-renowned and celebrated author, and he is particularly popular or known for popularizing the idea of the absurd, which is this philosophical concept that this book, The Myth of Sisyphus, deals with a lot. It's a great and interesting book to read because he draws on so many different great minds. He introduces or draws from works of Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, but also giants like Dostoevsky, Kafka, to name a few. It's obviously a very short book. It's only about a little over 100 pages long, you can see here. First published in 1942, and it's divided into 4 different chapters, which is not very much. It's an absurd reasoning, the absurd man, absurd creation, and the myth of Sisyphus. Those are the 4 chapters that this book dives into. And it deals a lot with this idea of justifying living in what feels like a meaningless world. And that's essentially what this idea of the absurd is this idea that the world or life is inherently meaningless. And then the question is, how do we grapple with that, and what does that mean? I think this is a feeling that plenty of us have felt from time to time. And he sort of says that, well, in this book, he sort of tries to say what happens if we take this idea of the absurd seriously, and then we follow its logical conclusions. Where do we get, without diving into some escapism, in Camus' words, which would be something like ideology or religion or distraction? Well, let's dive into it. Let's start with the title of the book, which is The Myth of Sisyphus. This derives from a Greek myth whereby Sisyphus was this king that in brief managed to chain up death to prevent people from having to die. Eventually death breaks loose and the Greek gods decide to punish Sisyphus, and they do this by putting him at a hill, having him roll up this massive boulder all the way to the top of the mountain. But right before it reaches the top, it will roll down again, and you'll have to repeat this action again and again, never fulfilling his job, essentially. And it is clearly a beautiful picture of something that feels completely futile and meaningless. And this is the image that Camus likens essentially to our lives. So this is the metaphor that Camus employs to represent our modern lives, which are also filled with futile tasks. Camus writes, "The workman of today works every day in his life at the same tasks, and this fate is no less absurd. It's only tragic in the rare moments when it becomes conscious." And so this is clearly this idea that our fate is likened to the fate of Sisyphus, which is why he employs this title in the book. So on the surface, Sisyphus' story seems like this immensely cruel joke. But this is where Camus saw something different, something radical. And all of this brings us to this idea of the absurd hero, which is all about embracing this gloriously futile world. At the end of the book, Camus writes that we must imagine Sisyphus happy. So we must imagine this hero happy despite being engaged in this completely meaningless and repetitive task. Now, why is that? Well, he's sort of saying that even though Sisyphus is conscious of the fate that he has, he still continues to keep pushing and keep toiling away. And I think it really ties into this idea of revolt in Camus' mind, which is that Sisyphus is truly a rebel by embracing the struggle that he is in rather than looking for some escape. And there's certainly a parallel to be drawn in our own lives here, which is about trying to embrace the struggle of our life as opposed to finding some means of escaping the realities of the situations that we are in. And instead of trying to look for higher purposes, Camus would suggest that we try to find joy in the act of living itself. And this is what he means by this absurd hero, I think. So what if meaning is not something we find, but something that we create? This is the question that Camus encourages us to consider. And the thing is that we are in this world, which by all means seems to be very absurd. There doesn't seem to be any inherent meaning to the world, and that can cause despair. Now, Camus suggests that we should not despair, but we should try and embrace this struggle that is life, because that's where life is actually found, and vitality, energy, passion, etc. Now let's talk about the absurd for a moment. Camus gives us the following condition, which is that humans, we build our life on the hope of tomorrow, yet tomorrow is what brings us one step closer to death, which is the ultimate enemy. And there is this idea that there is no inherent meaning in the world, which is what causes this absurd position that we are in. And Camus says that it is not that the world is absurd, nor human thought, but it is because we are these meaning-making machines in a way. We sort of need to make meaning or to understand the meaning of the place that we are in. And that is what causes this absurd condition that we find ourselves in. We're sort of frantically seeking for meaning, yet the universe remains silent. In the words of Camus, of course. Now, this idea of the absurd has this very basic notion that we feel foreign or alien to this world. We feel like we don't really fit in, or we don't feel at ease in the world. And this is a position that many great works of art begin from, and that also a lot of philosophers try and deal with. For instance, Martin Heidegger tries to sort of understand this feeling of the absurd. One of the terms he uses is, I think, thrownness, where we feel like we're sort of thrown into the world and we're sort of left to our own devices, which is certainly this very existential point of view. So these are a few of many things that you'll find if you read The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. I highly recommend you check it out. I mean, it's a short read, great philosophical piece of work, and it draws on so many great minds, and so definitely worth to check it out. It's short but dense, keep that in mind. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know down below what you thought, and also if you agree with Camus' point of view. I mean, I'm sure that there are many that don't agree with his point of view. I think his mode of thinking is sort of taking the absurd position from the beginning and then drawing its logical conclusions rationally, which may or may not be the right way of thinking about life. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time.